Introduction by Dr. Fred Bell. I suppose that I was overshadowed by the Pleiadians even before my birth, just as the electrical field of aura directs its magnetic properties to the red blood cells during the fetal formation of the embryo to form human fingerprint, our uniquely identifying physical characteristic. So it seems the Pleiadians look at the vibratory source of subtle energy fields to know from where comes the soul. And so it was that they found me and stood by me. I lived a restless life, racing cars and motorcycles alike, walking away from crashes that killed others. Yet, I always knew that there was something that I must do for mankind, not just for myself. What is written on these pages is the dramatized story of my life, as it unfolded to this very moment. The account of the automobile land speed test, the Air Force encounters, the NASA experiences are all true almost to the exact words. Nearly all the characters are real people. Some of the names have been changed, and some of the men and women portrayed are composites of actual individuals who have interacted with me in this life. The contacts with the Pleiadians continue now, more than ever. In the early years, UFO contactees were isolated and confined directly to their mentors, not because of favoritism, but because of the need for absolute clarity of purpose and vision. When I began conscious telepathic communication with Semjace, the beautiful cosmonaut from the Pleiades, I made many errors and received certain information incorrectly. The ego was constantly interjecting my idealistic aspirations, which sometimes covered the truth that Semjace insisted on conveying. If other Earthlings had been involved in my contact experience, the confusion would never have been resolved. Today, our involvement in such decline that by the time the system realizes how badly it has deteriorated, it may be too late. Today, our involvement is in such decline that by the time the system realizes how badly it has deteriorated, it may be too late. Our Global 2000 report states that certain negative aspects of the biosphere are irreversible. Then, there are incidents with the negative aliens, the so-called Greys. They may have given elements of their technology to the government, but the Pleiadians are giving a counter-technology to us that have greater healing powers, both planetary and human. And the remarkable nuclear receptor that you will read about in this book really does exist. The Pleiadians are giving us a technology that can take us deep into the stars in a matter of minutes or permit us to know not only whether a pregnant human female is carrying a boy or a girl, but who the soul is and from where it originates. Such are only the beginnings of the many wonders of the Pleiadian sciences. About the author. Dr. Fred Bell began his career in science with the biofeedback and other experiments in 1952 at the age of 9. In his early teens, he received educational grants to work on such subjects as atomic energy and particle physics. His late teens found him working with the U.S. Air Force and later aerospace with Dr. Werner von Braun. While studying with Eastern masters, he became a contactee of the now famous Pleiadian. Brad Steiger has written a bestseller documenting some of Dr. Bell's experiences, entitled The Fellowship. As a musician, Fred Bell has composed The Fellowship, The Sound, to share the adventure of a super-sensational, chakra excitation and a musical journey through space and time. He is currently touring the world giving lectures and concerts. Chapter 1. Fred Bell heard the voice again. A soft, feminine, strangely familiar voice spoke in an almost musical tone. "Be on guard, my dear one. There is those who would do you harm." He slowed his pace and stopped to lean against a wall, momentarily disoriented. What was wrong with him? Dr. Fred Bell, champion of the scientific method, did not hear voices in his head. "Hey, what's the matter, Chief? You aren't getting nervous, are you?" The smiling inquisitor was Eric Powell, his closest friend. "Come off it, Eric," a spirited female voice teased. "Fred wouldn't be nervous about giving the lecture to a bunch of flower children." Clarification. Eric Powell was his closest male friend. That was Kim Kingswold, speaking up to defend his sudden confusion. Kim was his closest female friend. The three of them had been steady allies since their high school days in Laguna Beach, class of 1957, 14 years ago. "I am not nervous," Fred said, a bit too defensively. I thought I heard something." "You heard the sound of nuts falling from the trees, Chief," Eric smirked, glancing around him. "Whatever made you agree to speak at a gathering of metaphysical weirdos?" "The pot calling the kettle black," Kim laughed. "Be on guard, my darling. Danger is near." Fred shook his head, leaning heavily against the wall. Like it or not, the words were coming from within his own skull. And his father's medallion, the one he found in Egypt in 1939, seemed almost to be pulsating against his chest. Fred's mother had only recently given him the lovely artifact with the almost luminescent emerald setting. He could not resist wearing it to his lecture presentation this afternoon. After all, his father, Dr. Paul Raymond Bell, had found it. The father that he had never known, the father that had been murdered by the Nazis before his birth. Could there be something wrong with the medallion? Could it be emitting some strange energy? "Are you okay, Fred?" Kim was solicitous, reaching out to steady him. Even Pal had stopped kidding around and had moved a strong arm around his shoulders to support him. "I'm all right." Fred waved his hands in front of him. "It's okay, please." Eric stepped back, respecting his friend's wishes, but Kim, ever the watchful mother, was slower to grant Fred his own space. Fred looked around him. What was there to fear at a psychic fair at the Holiday Inn in beautiful downtown Burbank on a sunny California day in 1971? "A cosmic celebration of creativity," proclaimed the banners, promotional brochures, a 3-day gathering of futurists, philosophers, flower children, and psychics. Fred had been invited to speak because of his NASA background, his open-mindedness, and his recent breakthrough inventions designed to alleviate the nation's growing population problem. He had heard that feminine voice before. Where? When? Was it some warning mechanism that duplicated the tones in his own mother? No, the voice was not quite that of his mother's, though it was filled with love and tenderness. But whatever the identity of the voice inside his skull, why was it uttering words of warning? Fred scanned the area. Colorful booths offering a wide assortment of esoteric talent just inside the meeting room. Tables were heaped with occult and paranormal paraphernalia. There seemed to be something of the atmosphere of the medieval carnival, a festive gathering of metaphysical merchants. And they were all there: astrologers, graphologists, sand readers, numerologists, tarot card interpreters, witches, echists, Silva mind control representatives, healers, UFologists, ceremonial magicians, Indian medicine priests, and a host of other isms and ologies that had been born in a moment of revelation and inspiration. Here was a marvelous cross-section of the metaphysical community: the sincere, the sensationalists, and the seekers. Who among them could possibly wish to do him harm? 30 minutes until the lecture, Chief. Eric was wearing his regular uniform of blue sweatshirt, faded jeans, and scuffed Adidas. Fred had never kept anything from Kim and Eric. "Look, guys," he began, trying to choose his words with some care. "In spite of over 2 decades of being open with them, I suddenly have a very particular feeling, a hunch, a premonition." "This is the right place for a prediction, buddy," Eric laughed. "Will you let him finish, you big lug?" Kim scolded, an impatient scowl narrowing her large brown eyes. She had dressed appropriately for the event, in a beaded leather vest and colorful Spanish gypsy-style skirt. "Eric, let's just say that I want you to be extra vigilant today," Fred said, deciding to wrap it up quick and easy for the moment. "You might have to reactivate some of those old football muscles." Powell sucked in his stomach, pulling himself erect to his full 6'2". He had added a few pounds to his best playing weight of 210, but the extra bulk might come in handy if there was truly a threat in the area. "You got a bad feeling about some bozo here?" Fred smiled at his friend's unconscious assumption of the masculine protective stance. In one way or another, they had been protecting each other since they were kids. "It's just a feeling, buddy. Fred stressed. "I don't want you punching out some flower kid's lights because you don't approve of his beads and his headband." Kim shifted uncomfortably, glancing over her shoulder. "If Fred has one of those feelings, maybe we should make our excuses and—" It was Fred's turn to interrupt. "No way. We are not leaving. I made a commitment to address this audience, and the show must go on." Eric snorted. "Look what's coming our way. Moby Dick." Fred and Kim turned with knowing smiles. Such a description could only apply to Brad Bronson, the well-known science fiction writer, who would be introducing Fred this afternoon. The three friends smiled broadly as they beheld the nearly 300-pound Bronson moving through the crowd like a great whale, moving through a school of tuna. "Welcome, my friends, to the new age," Brad greeted them. He wore an oversized black frock coat and a red and black checkered pocket handkerchief that matched his floppy bow tie. "You really dig this stuff, don't you?" Eric asked. "Of course, you cynical twerp. Once we find a conscious connection with the cosmos, every facet of human existence can be enriched," Bronson answered with his resonant bass. "And these psychics are going to get us connected," Powell pressed. Brad was bending to kiss Kim's cheek, so his answer was delayed until his greeting was consummated. "My boy, it is this cosmic spiritual impulse that dispels fear and insecurity in our personal lives and enables us to face our destiny with equanimity. These men and women only offer their insights to those who wish to hear them. If this is not your cup of tea, then put a lid on it and leave us alone. Run off and play in the traffic or something." Bronson and Fred shook hands, and the author's eyes widened perceptibly as they made their first acquaintance with the emerald medallion. "My boy, what a lovely, no, powerful, intriguing." "What?" Powell needled. "Is the internationally famous author at a loss for words?" Bronson grunted and scowled at Eric. "The correct words, anyway." Then, redirecting his attention to the medallion, "Where did you get it, Fred?" Fred explained that his mother had recently given it to him. "I don't believe that it is truly Egyptian, and I am something of an authority on such matters, you know," said Fred. In the late 1930s, Brad Bronson had been one of the kings of the newsstand pulp magazines, and he had captured the imaginations of his Weird Tales readership by creating an entire subculture with his own eerie mythos and internal logic. The most successful of his tales were centered on an ancient secret society of evil machines, set about wreaking havoc upon the unsuspecting world. Dominating this nefarious union of wizards devoted to the powers of darkness was a hellish master magician named Zobar. His opponent, the agent of the forces of light, was Dr. Sophia Solomon, an archaeologist who was the principal weapon in her fight against Zobar's Legion of Evil, was a sacred ankh that had a special crystal set in its center. When activated by her mind, the crystal would direct a laser-like beam towards the minister's negativity and cremate them on the spot. As captivated as the Zobar D. Solomon tales were, by the 1930s, another mad genius, who had also created an entire subculture with its own evil mythos and internal logic, was unleashing a master plan of aggression against the world. The horror spawned by Adolf Hitler had transmogrified the stuff of nightmares into the pain of reality. When a true monster is clawing at the front door, a monster of imagination must be put aside for another time. And so, during the war years, Bronson had discontinued his tales of the occult and created such characters as Sergeant Crash Carter of the U.S. Marines, Buzz Benedict of the Flying Tigers, and Mad Dog Murphy of the infantry. In the 50s, when Fred was in high school, Brad was grinding out B-movie scripts, such as Lust of the Devil Doomed and Children of the Slime God. By the 60s, he was once again established as a master of the strange and unknown, with his best-selling Daughters of the Moon, and with non-fiction books that seriously explored the paranormal and the metaphysical. A tall, commanding woman dressed in diaphanous green robes, a white turban, and a yellow sash caught Eric's arm as they passed a booth that declared her prowess as a reader of past lives. "You have the look of a teacher about you," she told Powell. "I'm already picking up that you are a high priest on Atlantis." Eric tried his arm from her grasp, and as he did so, he found himself peering intently at the costume ruby she had taped to the center of her forehead, no doubt to energize her third eye. For $15, she was telling him, I will give you a complete reading of 3 past lives. No thank you, Eric pauses, his eyes seeking out her precise name and title from the placard above her booth. Madame Cosma. I am having enough problems dealing with this lifetime. I couldn't handle knowing about the trouble I got into in my past lives. It's a pity that you don't stop for a reading, Eric, Brad sighed. Yeah, Kim agreed. You were probably a pirate or a horse thief. Seriously, Bronson continued. Knowledge of your past lives can help you understand your present life. We do have time, Eric, if you want to return to Madame Cosma, Fred teased his friend. Not necessarily Madame Cosma, Bronson shook his forehead, seeming to change his mind. I would recommend others for a more meaningful past life reading. I am really afraid that Madame Cosma will probably end up in a home for the terminally esoteric. Des McGowan, member of the program committee that had arranged for Fred's lecture, approached the group, smiling broadly as he waved an arm expansively. Great to see you all, he exclaimed, shaking hands all around. What do you think of the crowd, Brad? Looks good, Des, Bronson assured him. There must be 3,000 people milling around right now, and that's good for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, and there are another 300 already in Ballroom C waiting for Fred's lecture to begin, McGowan grinned. Des McGowan was impeccably dressed in a gray 3-piece suit and presented an image of assured professionalism. Fred had often noted that the metaphysical community seemed divided sartorially between those who dressed as though they were conventional business people and those who swathed themselves in the stereotypic wrappings of the gypsy, the swami, and the priestess. As if a beacon of light had beamed itself from Fred's medallion, Des McGowan suddenly noticed the artifact. My God, man, where did you get that? Fred started to explain about his father finding it in Egypt, but McGowan interrupted. That's not Egyptian, Fred. Oh yes, your daddy might have found it in Egypt, all right. But that thing is older than time itself. I agree, Des, Bronson said. I don't believe that it's Egyptian either, but it is one of the most remarkable artifacts that I have ever beheld. Oh, come on, guys, Fred protested. It's the energy that emanates from it, Bronson said solemnly. The vibes, McGowan nodded his head. It's the vibrations. You know, Fred, McGowan said as he slid an arm around his shoulders and whispered conspiratorially, a lot of folks are just waiting for you to come clean and admit that you have been channeling all those inventions from your spirit guide. His ego would never permit it, Bronson said, a bit too snidely for Fred to overlook his comment. Fred doesn't need any help, Kim jumped in, as always to defend her friend against anyone. He's a genius. Holy shit, Eric Powell chimed in. Come on, Des coded, pulling Fred closer to him. You were just a kid when you started coming out with those inventions. Maybe you are in contact with the space brother. Eric laughed at McGowan's persistence. I don't know about Fred, but I would rather make contact with a space sister. Fred reached out his hand to the center of Des's tie. If I ever make such a contact, Des, you and Brad will be the first to know. He made a dramatic flourish out of glancing at his wristwatch, and now, he smiled, I think it's showtime. As they walked into Ballroom C, Fred reflected that so many factors in an individual's life are but matters of perspective. From the cosmological reference point of Brad and Des, perhaps some spirit voice did whisper in his ear. What Fred called inspiration, his friends labeled spirit guidance. Who could say for certain? There were times, he had to admit, when he felt that he might be in touch with something external to himself. More and more, it had begun to seem to Fred that 95% of all the facts that people were convinced they knew, absolutely for certain, were but matters of their personal taste, their own opinions, and their own points of view. Brad Bronson embarrassed him with an introduction that stressed his innovative research, his inventions, his accomplishments with NASA, and ended with statements about his wonderkind, a teenage genius. As uncomfortable as those words might have been for Fred to hear, he had no way of knowing, at that moment, they might well have served as his epitaph. He barely warmed to his topic when he once again heard the voice inside his head. Now, my dear one, the danger is now. The attractive blonde in her 50s, second row center. Fred felt a particular wave of dizziness. He knew precisely the woman whom the voice had identified. She had been blessing him with the most beatific smile throughout the initial 7 minutes of the presentation. He took a breath to steady himself, then he directed his attention to the smiling lady. "Ma'am, you there in the second row." The smile disappeared from her face, and she began to shift uncomfortably, aware over 300 pairs of eyes were upon her every movement. "What is it you wish of me?" she asked, a soft German accent striking the words of her uneasy response. "I was wondering if you had a question." Fred's eyes were seeking out Eric Powell. His friend was at his usual lecture position, halfway from the podium, leaning against a wall. Their eyes locked, and Fred sent him a desperate, unspoken message. "I have no question." The woman's voice was stronger now. "Perhaps you have a problem with my presentation," Fred pressured her. The woman was on her feet. "My problem is you, Dr. Bell." The audience expressed its astonishment with a buzz of puzzled whispers and gasped speculation. "Why do I present a problem to you?" Fred wanted to know. "Because you are a thief. You have stolen from the Ancient Ones. You have stolen from the gift of the star gods." Her right hand dipped into her large purse and pulled out a snub-nosed .38 revolver. "You will pay for your interference." Eric Powell was there, as always. He chopped the revolver from the woman's hand with a karate blow to her wrist. Within moments, 2 security guards were on either side of her. "No, no, leave me be," she screamed. "You cannot take me before I complete my mission. No, no." With Eric in the lead, the 2 husky men began to drag-walk the woman to the exit. They were nearly out the door when she wrenched, free from one of the guards, with a twisting thrust of her body. Pulling against the grip of the guard who held her fast, she screamed out a rage of frustration. "Dr. Bell, you must be stopped. You have something that doesn't belong to you. You are a thief who has stolen the gift of the star gods. The Ancient Ones have decreed that you must be stopped, and you will be stopped." Then they managed to pull the woman from the lecture room, and Fred was left alone with 386 men and women who were looking to him for some kind of explanation.